A potential breakthrough in one of the world's most closely watched geopolitical standoffs. The United States and Iran have taken a step towards a possible deal, with Washington confirming that a memorandum of understanding has been signed ahead of a formal ceremony expected in Geneva on Friday. US President Donald Trump is calling it a major development, but one non-negotiable condition on their part: that Iran must never possess nuclear weapons. While Washington has signaled a path towards diplomacy, Israel has drawn its own red line. Prime Minister Netanyahu says that there can be no compromise on Iran's nuclear program. As the agreement moves closer to a formal announcement, the bigger test remains. Can this deal survive the deep divisions between Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem?
We have our deal done with Iran, and it should be successful. It goes to a second stage, which I think will be actually easier.
But Trump has also warned Netanyahu of being careful while dealing with Lebanon. Listen in.
Without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon. Now, I'm not happy with the way Israel has handled themselves with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. They should have been able to do the job faster. It just goes on forever. And when that happens, it throws a negative light on the big deal, and that's the deal with Iran.
Now, the deal may be done, but the differences remain visible. As the US-Iran agreement moves closer, Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu has again made Israel's position very clear, warning that the fight over Iran's nuclear ambition is far from over. Netanyahu says that he and Donald Trump do not always see eye to eye, but insists that his priority remains Israel's security. On Iran's nuclear program, he says the message is unchanged. With or without a deal, Iran will not have nuclear weapons. While questions remain over the exact contours of the agreement, Netanyahu says the struggle is still not over, and Israel will continue protecting its interests, including maintaining security zones against threats like Hezbollah. Now, further, in fact, what we're talking about and why this is so crucial for Israel is that despite the ceasefire, Israel has attacked two towns, Upper Nabateh and Kafar Tebnet in southern Lebanon. The Israel defense minister said that Israel would not withdraw from the areas of southern Lebanon despite the agreement reached by the US and Iran. Now, you're seeing on your screen the pink-colored area, and this highlighted portion of the map that you see on your screen represents the area of Israeli occupation in South Lebanon, including Beaufort Ridge, Christofani Ridge, Khiam, etc. The yellow portion shows the area inside the territory of Lebanon that Israel seeks to depopulate, and the slight orange tinge on the map shows the areas occupied by Israel to the north of the Litani River. All these areas have been under direct or indirect control of Israel. But why is Israel refusing to fully step away from what it calls the security zones? The answer lies in the decades of conflict with Hezbollah. The Iran-backed group emerged after Israel's 1982 Lebanon invasion and has remained one of Israel's biggest security concerns. Hezbollah openly opposes Israel's existence, called for its elimination in 1985, and fought a long guerrilla campaign that continued until Israel's 2000 withdrawal from Lebanon. The tensions escalated again in 2006 after a cross-border attack triggered a full-scale Israel-Hezbollah war. But even after that conflict, Israel says that Hezbollah did not fully disarm and continued expanding its military capabilities, building an arsenal that Israel considers a major threat along its northern border as well. As we count down to the peace deal signing ceremony, there are many contradictory claims doing rounds amongst the top stakeholders in the US-Iran conflict. Let's tell you what some of these claims are. The first is Trump's assertion he has denied that there are reports of a $300 billion payout. He's called the claim of payout as fake news and has denied US-funded rebuilding plan projects, out the reports as well of those. He's rejected the claims as political misinformation. What has Vice President J.D. Vance now come out and said? He has said a $300 billion rebuilding fund is being discussed. He further says the fund is seen as an international investment. He's added that Gulf nations, private investors may fund this particular amount. He's also said that the access depends on Iran's compliance with the various conditions. Iran's assertions now. Iran seeks an economic guarantee for rebuilding its country. It's also sought sanctions relief. It has further said that the frozen funds should now be accessed following this particular sanctions removal. It also wants funds for the war-damaged infrastructure to be rebuilt. It also says that economic incentives have to be given for ending the conflict as well. So let's quickly now take this across to Dr. Michael Rubin, of course, noted expert as well, who's joining us at the moment. He's also Director of Policy Analysis. Mr. Michael Rubin, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on Times Now. Now, you haven't been very optimistic when referring to the deal that has been announced by President Trump. Now, while we don't know what the fine print is, why are you skeptical?
Well, first of all, it's always a bad sign when those who are negotiating the agreement refuse to release the details until after the signing. My second source of concern is the fact that what is described in the American press and what is described in the Iranian press appear diametrically opposite. Finally, it's unclear if President Trump has managed to achieve any of the objectives which he had announced when he launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, 2026.
But at the moment, we do know a little bit about what at least is being stated by all the parties. Now, on one hand, you have Trump, who claims that Iran won't have a nuclear weapon. He's dismissed any claims that US will pay money to Iran to rebuild the country after American strikes. And he said that the Strait of Hormuz will open. On the other hand, you have Pakistan and Iran, who claim that the Lebanon aspect is very much part of the ceasefire deal. Do you see any of this being undone over the next 60 days?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, while Donald Trump has said the United States isn't going to give $300 billion in development funds and financing for Iran's reconstruction, his own administration, in background calls to analysts and the press, acknowledged that the United States would be giving funds or guaranteeing funds. And so Donald Trump is simply trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, or he honestly doesn't understand what is in his own agreement. At the very least, it appears that the United States is going to release, or pressure to have released, at least $12 billion initially in order to Iran simply to come to the table to negotiate over the next 60 days, and then an additional $12 billion after that. So it appears, in short, that everything for which Donald Trump and Republicans were critical of Barack Obama regarding the 2015 nuclear deal has simply been repeated, from the pallets of cash to the money up front to the sunset clauses and so forth. But I'll tell you, I'm glad you brought up Lebanon, because really it looks like Hezbollah is the poison pill in this. First of all, Israel and Lebanon are undertaking their most open and far-reaching diplomatic initiative in over 40 years. And the reason is because they both consider Hezbollah to be a common enemy. And yet, by suggesting that Israel is going to have its hands tied, Iran gets to rearm Hezbollah. And if Israel strikes in pursuit of its own defense, then Iran can walk away and take that $24 billion, or perhaps even the $300 billion, which Donald Trump has promised, even if he denies it now.
One of the reasons I'm actually asking you this is because President Trump, too, appears to be quite frustrated with the Israeli actions in Lebanon. And he's even said that Israel wouldn't exist without the United States. Now, what does this mean for the Trump-Netanyahu dissonance move? And will that prove to be the undoing of this deal potentially? And also, of course, the impact of this on the larger US-Israel ties?
Look, of course, I've been to Israel. I've been to India. And just this past week, I was in Ukraine. And what I can say with regard to Donald Trump is it's almost as if world leaders are playing games of musical chairs in which they simply don't want to be in Donald Trump's focus when the music stops. And we all remember that disastrous meeting which Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, had in the Oval Office. So what Netanyahu is going to do right now is simply try to wait out Donald Trump until Donald Trump's attention moves on, because Donald Trump doesn't have a sustained attention span. I mean, he sometimes appears to have the attention span of a monkey that's high on cocaine. And in this case, the Israelis are simply going to do what they need to do to face an existential threat. But at the same time, they're going to wait until Donald Trump moves on. The other thing that's going on behind the scenes, however, just like India learned that they could not rely on the United States when Donald Trump threatened to withhold the F-35 and other military goods and so forth to use our trade against India. India understood that it couldn't put all of its eggs in one basket. It would need to diversify its defense, its strategic interests, and so forth. The Israelis and the Emiratis have come to the same conclusion. So behind the scenes, what's going on now are the Israelis are simply looking for other alternatives. And India and the United Arab Emirates and joint technology and defense development is something that's certainly on their agenda. The last point, very quickly, is Donald Trump simply doesn't know history. Israel has no more relied consistently on the United States than Donald Trump has resolved the 1,500-year conflict between India and Pakistan. And of course, I say that sarcastically. Remember that during the Eisenhower administration, President Eisenhower in the 1950s wanted to side with the Arabs for realist reasons because there were so many more Arab states than Israel, and the Arab states had the oil. And at that time, Israel actually worked much more with France because the United States was denying it military goods and so forth. So there's a history here of Israel, like any independent country, going pursuing its interests wherever they may lie.
You just mentioned Pakistan, Mr. Rubin, and you've also not looked at the role of Pakistan in terms of brokering the peace very favorably. Why is that so?
Well, first of all, there's an irony here that the late Pakistani nuclear scientist A.Q. Khan helped Iran start its covert nuclear program, and now we're actually rewarding Pakistan with diplomatic chits and perhaps other advantages for helping broker this agreement. And that's sort of like rewarding the arsonist for starting the forest fire. But beyond that, you never want to choose a mediator that wants to see you lose. I mean, for the United States to rely on Pakistan as a mediator with regard to Iran would be equivalent for India to rely on the People's Republic of China to resolve any disputes over Bangladesh. The Indians are too smart to allow that to happen. I wish I could say the same thing about the White House.
Right. Now, we're also talking at a time when the G7 meet is underway in France. Now, multilateralism hasn't really had much of an impact, whether we're talking about West Asia or the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Do you expect something concrete to emerge from the G7 this time around?
No, I don't expect anything concrete. I suspect what's going to happen at the G7 is that leaders at the G7, especially those who are involved, who are members of NATO countries, are going to try to sound out the United States with regard to what is going to happen in the July 7th and 8th NATO summit back in Ankara in Turkey. That's what is looming large right now. When it comes to the broader issue, India, for example, and others, the United States simply is withdrawing from the world stage. And as midterm elections come up, we're going to be focused on our politics. I should say that the Europeans, being as cowardly as Europeans traditionally are now saying, after they opposed the Iran war, now that we have a ceasefire, they're saying, well, now we want to participate. Tell us what you want, which also is unrealistic and is going to rub the United States very much the wrong way.
Now, Dr. Rubin, at a time when we're looking at, India and U.S. Ties also, India has been calling for peace right through the war. We've been speaking to all the sides as well. But what somehow doesn't help matters is when the United States does not even express regret for its airstrikes killing 3 of our sailors off the coast of Oman. Now, while India has lodged a protest, we've spoken to American counterparts, it seems that both Trump and Rubio don't really care. Doesn't this sort of a response create an atmosphere of mistrust in your view?
Yes, it absolutely does. First of all, when it comes to the unfrozen assets, for example, which this new agreement is supposed to give to Iran, what I would argue needs to happen is that those assets should be paid first to the victims of some of these missile strikes. At the Abu Dhabi International Airport, at Kuwait's International Airport. And of course, in Kuwait, an Indian was killed. And if we actually use those Iranian assets as reparations for attacks on civilians, that would send a message to Iran that they could not be rewarded for their terror. So unfortunately, it seems that the United States, true to form, is now throwing its allies under the bus in pursuit of an embrace with its adversary. Frankly speaking, and I say this as a historian, I never thought that we would see an agreement where Donald Trump simply makes Neville Chamberlain look like Winston Churchill by comparison.
All right. And, one other very important aspect from the US-India perspective is that Trump and Modi have a bilateral meeting that is to take place today. They've met on the sidelines of the G7 meeting as well. And this is the first physical meeting after 16 months. We've seen the brief interaction, of course, between the two leaders ahead of that bilateral, but there were no hugs, just the handshake. Do you think that this meeting will prove to be an icebreaker?
Well, put it this way. I hope it's an icebreaker, but as an American policy analyst, our policies are always stronger when we calibrate them to reality rather than wishful thinking. Given the betrayal, which has the American betrayal of India that has marked the second Trump administration term, and given this inexplicable relationship between Donald Trump and some of the terror masters in Islamabad and Pindi. I mean, it would be foolish to read too much into this. Make no mistake, the bureaucracy of the United States, Congress, the Pentagon, the State Department, pretty much everyone wants to resume the growth of our bilateral ties between New Delhi and Washington. The wild card is Donald Trump, and the fact that Asim Munir is somehow whispering into his ear because one of Donald Trump's old golfing buddies used to be a lobbyist for Pakistan, that's going to remain a real problem because Donald Trump tends to react to the person with whom he spoke last. And so if he gets on a call with Recep Tayyip Erdogan or with Pakistani officials, then anything he said to Prime Minister Modi goes out the window.
Right. And finally, Mr. Rubin, I must ask you this. You mentioned the midterm polls in the United States, which are going to be an issue of concern there. There is also the fact that later this year, there are elections in Israel, and Netanyahu will have to do his own explaining and his own positioning. In light of all of this, how do we know that this deal that we're going to be seeing signed on Friday, in all possibility, is not going to be more fragile than the previous promises that we have seen, in the run-up to this in the past several weeks?
Oh, it's completely fragile. When I look at Vice President J.D. Vance's statements, for example, he's coming off as both arrogant and ignorant given the Iranian playbook. When you look at how the Iranians negotiate, they like to run out the clock. They like to delay. They like to transform the goal from an elimination of their nuclear program to simply having another round of talks. Essentially, Donald Trump, for all of his criticisms and so forth, has become Joe Biden or Barack Obama version 2.0. This is really going to hurt Donald Trump at home electorally. And while perhaps some Republicans feel that having this peace will get Donald Trump back to his MAGA, Make America Great roots. The problem is, by agreeing not to interfere in Iranian domestic politics, what Donald Trump is setting the stage for is standing aside when the Iranians massacre their own people again. And if that comes forward, it's going to be a very, very bad look, which is going to embarrass any proponent of this deal and any proponent of the military conflict. And so, unfortunately, it seems that Donald Trump is going down the rabbit hole, which is going to lead the pendulum politically in the United States to swing in an extreme way into the other direction.
All right, Mr. Michael Rubin, a former Pentagon official and Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum, thank you so much for joining us and explaining all of this for our viewers. And with that, it's a wrap on the briefing room this evening. Do join us tomorrow evening at 10 p.m. for another edition.